All right, ladies and gentlemen, MrSotko here. Welcome back to the channel. We're going to talk about the United States Bitcoin ETFs that have been approved. And as you can see, the mustache is growing larger. So you know Bitcoin's price is way, way up. So the first one that has been approved is ProShares Bitcoin Futures ETF. Now, this is slightly different from just a regular ETF, in the sense that it's sort of a basket of stocks or something like that that can be traded multiple times a day, as opposed to a basket of stocks that can only be traded once a day, which is like mutual stock. And these Bitcoin futures are going to be settled on a monthly basis, as usually futures are. So what you need to know, this is a great article that's going to talk about everything in the ETF. So we've been waiting for an ETF for a long time. However, I have a mild skepticism about this, because we did have a Bitcoin futures come out in December 2017, and literally that day it dumped to the bottom, basically. Well, it took a year, but over the course of that year, it dumped pretty major. However, those were cash-backed futures, so it was basically betting on a horse race. You don't own Bitcoin as you don't own the horse, you're just betting on it. However, that doesn't mean that you couldn't sell or buy a bunch of Bitcoin on various exchanges to raise or lower the price and meet your long or short, which you could do with this Bitcoin ETF as well. So just to let you guys know, there is some hype about this. The price is way up. However, people could just as easily short Bitcoin as they could long Bitcoin. However, with an ETF coming out, the idea is that these institutional investors that needed an ETF in order to package it into their 401ks or this, that, or the other thing, also with various rich people in the world, they might have some kind of financial advisor, and that financial advisor can't legally just go to Coinbase and buy them some Bitcoin. They need an approved institutional investment firm, and that's why we need an ETF. So the kind of people that are going to be using these ETFs don't already have Bitcoin. So the price is probably naturally going to increase, particularly when we get a multiple daily settled actual ETF that is non-futures. Again, the people that are using this are the kind of people that don't already have Bitcoin, so there's really nothing to sell right away. So this week marks a major milestone in the crypto world, as the first US Bitcoin ETF begins trading on Tuesday, which is today, as the article was written yesterday. The news fueled a rally last week, driving the price of Bitcoin above 60,000. So it's from ProShares Bitcoin Strategy ETF, and it's under the marker BITO. So you're basically, again, kind of buying a slight derivative. You're betting on Bitcoin. It is Bitcoin backed and settled, but it's sort of a monthly type deal, as it's futures. ETF stands for Exchange Traded Fund. ETFs buy and package an asset or multiple assets, anything from gold to a themed basket of different corporate shares, and then sells it in the form of one stock that anyone can trade on the public markets. ETFs are designed so that the price tracks the price of the underlying asset. So the new Bitcoin ETF, however, is a little different from a pure Bitcoin ETF. As I was saying before, what ProShares is buying and packaging is not Bitcoin, but rather a bundle of contracts tied to the future price of Bitcoin. So we almost have a Grayscale situation. Grayscale is basically an ETF in sheep's clothing, if you will. So basically, they have to buy Bitcoin. However, they're trading you GBTC in terms of Grayscale, so which is tied to the price of Bitcoin somewhat. However, there's a discount going on right now because everybody's interested in the ETF factor of it and not necessarily Grayscale. So when we have a pure Bitcoin ETF, again, the kind of people that are going to buy Bitcoin through an ETF are the kind of people that don't already have it. So it's very unlikely, in my opinion, that it's going to result in an extreme dump like we had with CME futures. So they'll invest primarily in Bitcoin futures contracts and does not directly invest in Bitcoin. So unless you're an experienced trader, it's certainly more complicated than a regular share of a company's stock. Unlike a regular ETF whose price will closely track the underlying asset it holds, futures ETFs can trade at different values, and it's partly because pro traders are using futures ETFs to arbitrage price movements. So how do I buy the new Bitcoin ETF? ETFs trade on the stock market. So if you have an account with a brokerage such as Fidelity or Robinhood, just look up the ticker symbol and buy it like you would with shares of Microsoft or Tesla or Square. So when will you be able to buy it? It's announced on Monday that BITO will begin trading on Tuesday. So the annual fee of ProShares ETF is 0.95%, according to MarketWatch. So if you buy $1,000 in shares, $9.50 a year will go to fees, which is higher than most regular ETFs charge. It's largely due to the fact that this is a futures ETF. So are there other Bitcoin ETFs coming? So as many as 3 or 4 other funds are expected to receive SEC approval and begin trading as soon as this week, but they will also be futures ETFs resembling the ProShares offering in price and structure. A traditional ETF that holds Bitcoin, which are available in other countries, is still at least months away from regulatory approval in the United States. So it says, is this a good way to buy Bitcoin? I'm just going to go ahead with no on there right away. However, again, there's institutional investors that like to buy in this legitimate way. So if you want to gain exposure to Bitcoin through a brokerage account, this offers a new way to do that. And again, with ETFs, if you have just some rich guy and he wants to use his brokerage or his, institutional investor to buy him something, they need a legit way to do that. And they do that through an ETF. So they can't just be like, oh yeah, no, I put some Bitcoin on a Trezor for you. Sure, you could do that personally, but legally through the proper channels, you're going to need an ETF. And that's why this is really important to get a real ETF and not necessarily the futures ETF. I mean, this is a good start, but that's why it's a great idea, because there are a lot of people out there with a lot of money who are not going to buy Bitcoin themselves. They're not going to go on an exchange. They're not going to do this or that or the other thing. They're not going to mine it. Note that you could also do this by buying shares of Grayscale Bitcoin Trust, so with GBTC, because again, Grayscale is effectively an ETF without the ETF actual. It's basically an ETF with a sheep's clothing on top of it, walking around amongst other ETFs. It's like, oh, hello there. How do you do, fellow kids? And that's why they have GBTC. So you're not buying directly Bitcoin. Instead, you're buying their derivative, and which is good because they have something like $40 billion in Bitcoin that they have bought over quite a while here. An option that's been around for a while but charges a 2% annual fee. It doesn't exactly match the price of Bitcoin. So that's what all the hype is about right now, is that ProShares Bitcoin ETF trading. It has begun today. But again, it's futures. It's really only like monthly settled. And you're really not investing directly into Bitcoin. We need a pure Bitcoin ETF for that. So again, another one here. Bloomberg analyst, a second Bitcoin futures ETF could start trading this week as well. Again, it's just a futures one in the similar one that we just talked about. Bloomberg received a listing action from Valkyrie Funds for their Bitcoin futures exchange traded fund. The Valkyrie Bitcoin Strategy ETF was thought to be starting trading as early as tomorrow, October 19th, under the ticker symbol BTF. However, new information from Bloomberg ETF analyst Eric Balkunas indicates that it might start trading on Wednesday or Thursday. So Valkyrie literally exploited its status as a first-time issuer to skip the queue by requesting to become effective. Valkyrie could join ProShares and have their Bitcoin futures ETF start trading this week, however, a couple days later. Earlier today, ProShares confirmed that its Bitcoin strategy would begin trading tomorrow or today, Tuesday. So we do have another one on the way, but this is good. I'm mildly excited by this. We need a true Bitcoin-backed futures, ETF, where institutional investors can trade it on the daily back and forth multiple times. Again, with mutual stock, it's similar to an ETF where they're packaging multiple stocks together that have a long-term increase in their price, if you will. I don't know why I could. And so when you buy that, you buy this package, and you can only sell it or buy it once per day. And which is usually good because they're long-term investments anyway. Whereas an ETF, you could be trading back and forth, and that's sort of what we need. It would increase the volume of Bitcoin a lot. It would bring a lot of whales and institutional investors into buying Bitcoin. But moving on here, Grayscale, the ETF in sheep's clothing, that's not really an actual ETF. It's basically like three kids in a trench coat going to try to buy a bottle of liquor. It's close. It's close enough. You might fool some people, but other people are just going to open up the trench coat and go, oh, you're just three kids in a trench coat. That's basically what Grayscale is. Grayscale Bitcoin Trust hits a 20% discount as firm files for an ETF conversion. So they're desperately trying to file for an ETF conversion because GBTC is on the down. They're not as cool anymore. Not as hip. Not hep anymore. However, we do have to thank Grayscale indeed for buying literally tens of billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin, Ethereum, and various other cryptocurrencies, helping to keep the price afloat and explode over the past couple years. There's more frustration for Grayscale Bitcoin Trust investors as Grayscale's flagship product is now suffering from a 20.53% discount on Monday. The discount means the market price of GBTC shares is more than 20% lower than its net asset value. So 20% lower, so it's something like probably $43,000 as opposed to $60,000, what Bitcoin's at now. Actually, technically, Bitcoin's at like 62 or something. But for the most part, that's quite the discount. That means their investors aren't making such good money at the moment. According to Grayscale's website, each GBTC share currently amounts to 0.0093 Bitcoin. This means that Bitcoin per share was worth $57.44 at the market close. However, GBTC is actually trading around $45.65. While Grayscale Bitcoin Trust has some similarities with the Bitcoin ETF, giving investors exposure to Bitcoin without having the need to physically buy or hold it, the two have some differences. GBTC enables investors to trade shares and trusts holding large pools of Bitcoin, while a Bitcoin ETF offers an opportunity to invest in a fund that directly tracks the price of the underlying asset. So close. Three kids in a trench coat trying to buy a pack of smokes from the convenience store, basically. Once in a while, they get away with it. Currently, they're not. And there's a little PSA out, and there's a little wanted poster on the front of every liquor store and convenience store saying, watch out for three children in a trench coat. And that's Grayscale at the moment. 20% discount? Yeesh. Because everybody's interested in the ETFs that are popping up. But moving on to CoinMarketCap here, we have $62,477 Bitcoin. We did briefly touch $63,000 Bitcoin, so nearly back at the all-time high. We were at $3,800 Bitcoin at the just before I started, or excuse me, $3,800 Ethereum just before I started this video, actually. So the hype is settling a little bit, but we'll have to see how this plays out over time. Are these ETFs going to be really good for Bitcoin, or are they going to tame the price of Bitcoin, or are they going to dump the price of Bitcoin? Because you could easily just short all of this if you wanted to. One thing that I'm a little bit cautious of is that dumping from shorting. Another thing I'm a little bit less cautious of, but is taming the price of Bitcoin and slowing its rise and falls. And now that you could argue that's a good thing to make it a better currency, but it will never be a very good currency. In some ways. I know that's just totally blasphemy. People are just like, whoa, wait. Just because of its low transaction rate, it's much better long-term investment in that way. And for a personal transfer of currency, it's great. But in terms of like a mass worldwide currency transferring, unless you're transferring a lot of money with it at a time. However, One thing that makes Bitcoin Bitcoin is the fact that one day it's going to be $62,000, the next day it's going to be $52,000. And those are really great trading opportunities. And if we really tame the price of Bitcoin through these ETFs or something like that, then it'll be just less interesting for the average investor and more so for the institutional investor and their slow, steady gains, whereas the regular investor isn't going to make much by trading it after that, just because its price movements are going to be very small, similar to many stocks today. But that's all I have for you guys. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel to help out. Click that subscription bell as well. Otherwise, YouTube isn't going to notify you when a video comes out. But that's all I have for you guys. Hope you enjoyed it. As usual, I'll see you guys next time.